Hi, I'm Michael Epps-Utley. I'm joined by Chris Rains and Bill Seaver. We're the co-producers of Repartee. Every episode, we sit down with two leaders from an industry and hear what it's like from a couple of different perspectives. This episode is our healthcare episode.
Yeah, healthcare, obviously one of the biggest contributors to the local economy here in Nashville where we film the show. And we've got two great guests this episode. Our first one is Chris Redhage. Now Chris has been involved in a number of technology and healthcare startups in his career. His latest is Provider Trust. Provider Trust helps healthcare organizations deal with compliance issues with regard to their vendors. And they just recently passed their 5-year mark. They were founded in 2010. And so they kind of passed that milestone as a startup. And so we're going to talk to Chris about various issues regarding being a healthcare startup here in Nashville, which is one of the epicenters of healthcare in the United States.
Yeah, and our other guest is David Dill. David is the President and Chief Operating Officer for LifePoint Health. LifePoint owns and operates 65 hospitals around the country and 70 other healthcare providing agencies. They're a $5.5 billion a year company where they have 40,000 employees as well. And healthcare is a big issue and a big topic of conversation in our country. So I'm real interested to see where the conversation goes tonight.
Yeah, we're almost done setting up to film tonight. We're really excited that you're part of the audience. Welcome to Repartee.
Well, guys, thank you for being here tonight. It seems like there's a lot of suspicion and just a wide variety of opinions around the topic of healthcare. So I'm curious, just first off, how did you personally decide to get into healthcare in the first place?
My story is I didn't grow up wanting to become a physician, wanting to become a doctor. I grew up in a family where my father was a basketball coach and my mom was a teacher. And I wanted to be a basketball player. Somewhere along the way, my dad told me that I could be a lot of things in life, but one of them probably wasn't going to be a basketball player. And so then I wanted to be a coach. And I watched my father, and like most kids, you want to be like your father, and I want to be a coach. And my dad told me something that was very profound at the time, and I didn't realize it. And it's really shaped a lot of my thinking ever since I've been out in the world. And it was around, son, you need to find yourself a career where you surround yourself with a bunch of professionals and not a bunch of 18-year-old kids that have never been away from their mother to determine your success. And that was his nice way of saying, you don't want to become a coach. Find yourself a career where you're around professionals. And so I sat on the bench with my dad coaching, and I was keeping score of games, and I love numbers, and I decided to go to college and get an accounting degree. I did that and packed up everything I owned, which wasn't much, and moved to Nashville and spent the first 5 years in public accounting here in town. And I had an opportunity in 1996 to join a new organization that was forming, an organization, we'll talk about it throughout the course of the evening tonight, I'm sure, but an organization with great people, with a great business plan, and it happened to be in healthcare. And just who I am as a person once I got over there in the healthcare setting, even though I didn't go to school to be a healthcare professional, I knew this was something that I would do for the rest of my life. I knew that I would do something in the healthcare field, caring for people in their most vulnerable time and running a business that focuses on taking care of the patients wherever they are. And so that started in 1996, and here we are in 2015, and never looked back.
Yeah, and I would say like mine is a little bit different. I don't think of myself as a healthcare technology entrepreneur per se. I mean, it's kind of like David, by happenstance. My mom, I always laugh. I actually told this story today. Like, my mom laughs that I'm a healthcare compliance guy. Like, I run a software company that does compliance because I was the guy who was always breaking the rules and always trying to think outside the box. But I actually got involved. I was coaching soccer at the University of Nebraska. I just got done playing. And an older gentleman in Louisville, Kentucky needed a young kid to start businesses. And so that's actually how I got involved in healthcare. He ran a neuroimaging company. And so I was actually helping him develop that, and then got into healthcare staffing, and then ultimately got into software and moved down here and started Provider Trust about 5.5 years ago.
So I think there's an interesting interchange between healthcare and business and how they work together or don't. And I think there's, again, we're talking about a wide variety of opinions. So how do you sort of work within an industry that does something as personal as healthcare and yet still meet the financial obligations that your shareholders have for you?
Yeah, well, it is a balance for sure. And over the last 20 years for me, I've worked in publicly traded entities. So we are under the microscope of every day, every quarter, announcing our results and how we're doing. So there is a lot of pressure to meet shareholders' expectations that you pointed out. But part of my job as the leader of the organization is to balance those expectations with what the patients need. And so while there are inherent tensions that are there, I think they're pretty healthy tensions. And I think it's been proven over and over again in healthcare, and specifically here in Nashville, that you can balance that. If we keep patients at the center of everything that we do, and we keep the expectations of our shareholders in balance, then we can be successful doing both. So while there's times where I struggle with that, when I take a longer view of it, I haven't found it to be that difficult, but it is balanced and focused in on doing what's right for the patient each and every time. And if we do that, it tends to work out okay for our shareholders. And there's so many examples of that here in Nashville, dating all the way back to Hospital Corporation of America, back in the late 60s through today, and the companies that will be formed into the future, that it can happen and will happen, and it's by taking care of patients first. So I don't see it as big of a tension as you might think.
David, I always love to hear your answer or hear how you talk about this, because you're running a public company. I run a startup in a lot of ways. We're a growing startup, and we have shareholders and venture-backed, startup. How do you balance the quarterly demands of the public, right, and your shareholders with the patient, and what does that look like, and what are the tensions in there?
Well, it's laying out a vision for them on here is what we're doing, and we tell our shareholders all the time that the first thing that we do every day is providing high quality care to patients close to home. And we're a hospital management company. We have hospitals spread out throughout the country, and so making sure that our shareholders know the things are important to us. I hope to deliver superior returns to them, but I like to think of them as optimal returns. And optimal returns means there may be things I sacrifice as a shareholder to do what's right for the patient. There may be some things that I have to sacrifice for a patient to deliver optimal returns. But finding that balance over time, and a lot of it is just communication and trust that we have with our shareholder base over time. And even though it changes, they know who we are as an organization. And they know that before they make the decision to invest. I would think, if I put the question back to you, I would think yours is probably even a little more difficult, where you have shareholders that may even have a shorter period of an investment horizon, where they may be looking at it solely as a short-term investment. And how do you balance that? Even though you may not be seeing patients in a bed, what you're doing is a valuable resource to making our job easier. So how do you balance that with people that may have a different time horizon than many of our shareholders?
Yeah, so I really say we have really three customers, and just in terms of me. Like we have our employees, which we put first, and we want to love them, and culture is a big thing at Provider Trust. Like we pride ourselves on having a great culture that cares for them. But then, with I basically service companies that David runs. And our job is to make them more efficient, reduce their risk, and ultimately try to save them money. And so we have that customer. But then what David asks is, our shareholders, and that's, our investors. That's hard, because we want to love our employees and we want to pay them well, right? And our shareholders are like, well, we need to see profit. Yeah. And really ultimately for a startup, like we're about revenue growth. So how fast can we grow? We have to have really talented people there. And so it's hard. I mean, every day you're making decisions on what are you going to pay someone. And, David, you have, how many employees do you have?
50,000 roughly.
I have 25,
Right.
But I get the most joy, I always say, I get the most joy when they start having kids, they start buying houses. Yeah. And the reality is, like, Provider Trust started with a $10,000 investment that I made to develop this technology, and it's created all these jobs. And so that's where it gets me excited about every day is, I get to work with large organizations like David and LifePoint and community health systems and service them. A really cool story today, actually. We were on a call with down in Texas, the large hospital system down there, and our client success person, the person on the other end, our client, was knitting our customer success people scarves, and literally asked for our address, and they're shipping up scarves. Like, that's cool when our client success people are loving our clients that well.
Well, whether it's 50,000 employees or 25 employees that you have, the opportunity that we have as leaders and the obligation that we have as leaders to provide and to create a great place to work. And balancing that out, and in my business, it's balancing out with shareholders, Bill, that you mentioned, or balancing out with patients in a bedside. But that obligation and opportunity to lead and make a difference in the lives, no matter how big the platform is, you're making a difference in every single one of those decisions. That's what drives me as a leader, and I hope to be able to do for a long time.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of just varied perspectives on the American healthcare system as a whole. And you guys, I mean, anytime you're inside an industry, you get to see, how it's done. You get to sort of see a real perspective of it. So I'm curious what you guys would say, what does the average American not understand about our healthcare industry?
There's a lot. And there's a lot that I don't understand about the healthcare industry. It is so complex. And I think of just the recent changes. It's what we call the Affordable Care Act. Some people may call it Obamacare. But the Affordable Care Act created more access and coverage, so insurance products. So just something as simple as educating the public on an insurance product. And we have hospitals in small communities around the country. And when many of the people in these communities sign up for health insurance, they look, what is the cheapest cost? They don't really understand what is a copay, what is a deductible, what is an out-of-pocket maximum. It's very complicated. So they buy the cheapest product that's out there. Then they come for care into our hospitals, and our caregivers on the front line are trained to deliver care. So that's what we're going to do. I don't care what kind of insurance you have, we're going to take care of you. And then on the back end, we're going to tell you what you owe us for that. And so when we explain to them, here's what you owe us, the response is, what do you mean? I have insurance. Well, I don't know if you know what kind of insurance you had, and your responsibility is the first $500 or the first $1,000. And $500 is a rent payment. It's 2 car payments. It's college tuition payments for families that are trying to raise kids. So it's real, but they don't understand. I don't think they really understand how complex the business is. First of all, I'm not sure we understand how our bodies work, so just the body is complex. And then you're coming into the hospital when you're very vulnerable and scared. So your mind's running a lot of different places. So you enter the system scared, and then you don't understand what kind of coverage you have, and you don't understand what anything costs. So it's not as if the American public just doesn't understand it. It's just too complex. And one of the things I talk to people, entrepreneurs similar to Chris, is we've got to find ways to make this business more simple. Mm-hmm. And just one quick story, and we can move on. I'm sure Chris has some thoughts around this too. But my father, who is in his mid-70s now, I have no idea, Chris, how he found this, but he brought me about 3 months ago a frame, and it was a picture of, and it was his hospital bill when he was born in 1942. So it was his hospital bill, and how simple that hospital bill was. And so now in my office, I have the 1942 hospital bill, and then I had our team print off, what does a newborn baby bill look like today, and how complex this business has become over 75 years. And my dad gave me this because he said, David, one of the things I've always appreciated about you is you take things that are complex and make them a little more simple. And so I tell entrepreneurs all the time, if you're going to be successful in this business, and what we really need and what the public needs, it gets right at the core of your question is, what we've got to do is take something that's inherently complex and a little scary and make it simple. And we may never be able to get back to a bill that looked like my father's newborn baby bill in 1942. But we can start looking more like that than we are today. So that's a call to Chris and others and entrepreneurs on how do we take the technology and the brain power that's assembling around the country and here in Nashville and create something that's simple, that creates efficiencies. We've got to do that.
Is that bigger than, I mean, that seems like that's so much bigger though than any one hospital system. Or
It is.
I mean, you guys could become phenomenal at that, but there's so much more. So where does that start? Where does that change begin to even?
It starts in small incubators and at the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville. It starts with tools and resources that can come in not just to my organization but to others to make it simple. So it's not as simple as just one thing. I wish it was just as simple as one thing, because then surely there's somebody like Chris Redhage that could go figure that out. It's not that complex. But with the resources and focus, we are now almost 20% of the GDP. So, you know, it's almost 1/5 of the GDP, a little less than that. And it's unsustainable. And we've got to find ways to create efficiencies and tools and resources and smart new organizations that can help disrupt and change the status quo is what I think Nashville needs. It's what the healthcare system needs. And the patients, once again, where we started you asked a question earlier, let's do what's right for the patient. Right. This is exactly what's right for the patient when they come into our hospital. So that's where we need help from you and all the others that are out there. So that's a great question for you. How are you going to solve this?
Well, you know, my company started in a lot of ways that the momentum has started because of Obamacare, because of the healthcare reform. Right. Section 6501 says if you're excluded in one state, you're now excluded in all, right? My business, which is doing multiple millions of dollars, is now, you know, because of this one little piece in the bill. And what we're trying to do, our tagline is simplify healthcare compliance. But just one bill creates so much work, so much effort for these large hospital systems, long-term care. We have a saying, if you've seen one healthcare client, you've seen one, because they all do things differently, right? And so it's like, how do you simplify it and what do you do? And it is entrepreneurs, but it's leaders like David who allow entrepreneurs and, you know, startups to come in and work with their organization. And that's what's so great about Nashville, right? Like, I mean, I was talking about this last night, like Nashville is special because of the collaboration. And I truly believe that the collaboration starts from the music industry. Like you look at how artists come and they co-write, you know, and you have the publishers and, you know, all these people just to get a song onto the radio. And, you know, that's what's so great about Nashville. I mean, I moved down here 6 years ago and was able to raise funds to be able to start Provider Trust. You know, I'm not a Nashville native, but just being able to meet people and get connected. And so the collaboration that goes on in Nashville is really, really great.
I mean, it sounds like you're trying to navigate these huge changes, but how do you lead an organization through that? So it's interesting, you know, you kind of, with all the healthcare changes, you kind of were able to sort of come in and sort of take advantage of that and say, and build now a company around that. So I'm curious, how are ongoing changes continuing to affect what you're doing? And then how do you lead in an environment that feels like it's just sort of shifting all the time and just lead 50,000, you know, people through that and with, you know, culture and processes and all the stuff that you have going on in a company the size of yours?
Well, it starts with culture. I'm glad you mentioned that word. That's something that's near and dear to our organization, and it's one of the things that drew me to this organization. And as we have grown, the Affordable Care Act that Chris mentioned, it was the impetus that started your business. It has created consolidation in this industry, and so for us, it's one thing to maintain a culture across a group of assets or hospitals. I don't like to call them assets, a group of hospitals that we've owned for a long period of time, where there's trust, there's relationship, there's confidence that's there. But what we have done over the last 6 years is we've doubled the size of this company. And so we have new organizations coming into the organization all the time. And just between October 1st and maybe January 31st, and don't worry, this is all public information, so I'm not sharing with you something that is not out there for the public, we will add close to $1 billion of new revenue to our company. And that means about 5,000, maybe 6,000 employees in 3 different states. So where I spend most of my time is I've got a great group of people that I make sure that they make sure the integration's working, we get standardized systems in place, the trains are moving. Where I spend my time alongside our chairman and CEO is the culture piece, on making sure that those new organizations know who we are, and that same type of internal equity that we have with our people that have been with us for a long time, that we invoke our culture onto the new organizations so they know that things are important. And it's a very scary time. Anytime there's consolidation that's happening, people are fearful. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to keep my job? I was recently at a new hospital that we were bringing into the company, and I was talking about the change, and there was this lady in the front row, and her leg was just bouncing. And I knew something was on her mind, and I asked for questions, and she didn't ask any questions. So I immediately jumped off the podium, and I went down to see her, and I sat next to her. And I said, "What's going on?" "Something is going on." And she looked at me, and she got a little tear in her eye, and she said, "I've been saving my PTO time, my vacation time, to have my knee replaced. And this transaction could not have come at a worse time. Am I still going to be able to have my knee replaced?" And when I told her the answer was yes, everything that you have earned, you're going to keep, and we go the next day and you're in the exact same position, as soon as I said that, the world lifted off of her shoulders and nothing else mattered. So making sure that you stay connected to people that way, that we're not this Nashville-based, for-profit, shareholder-focused company, but we're an organization that maintains the culture of patient-centered care, taking care of people, balancing the needs of our shareholders, and creating value along the way. Not just value for shareholders, value for the communities that we serve as well.
Yeah, every morning at Provider Trust, we have these 6 core business principles and then 6 core values. And one of them is like, be the hustle you desire, or tell the truth and do what's good. And so not your typical like integrity or whatever, but we have this, we call it a formation every morning. And we talk about one value every morning for 10 minutes. And I would say the 2 things that have allowed our culture is hiring the right people. So we always say it's really hard to get hired at Provider Trust. But 2, this morning meeting where every morning, and now actually one of the team members actually leads the morning session. So they have to bring something from the outside. And the creativity and the ownership, and actually they're cultivating the culture, which is great. I love what you guys do, where you honor a team member from each of the communities and you guys bring them in. That would be kind of cool. What you told me this once. What's your favorite story of, like, in terms of someone? What do you call it in terms of?
We have an event every year where we bring our employee of the year of each of our hospitals into the organization. We bring them here and create an experience for them. We used to give them money, and I didn't think giving them money was the right thing to do, because money, it gets spent, they give it away. These are caring people, and they give it away. And I went back and interviewed many of the employees and asked them, when you won the award 5 years ago, what'd you do with it? I can't remember. I gave it away probably, or I spent it on something. So I want to create an experience where we bring all of the winners in every year. And so this past year, just in September, we had 70, one from every hospital, come in. And several years ago, Chris and I have talked about this before, one of my favorite stories, there was a lady from Selma, Alabama. She'd been in our hospital for, she'd been working in the same department in the same hospital for almost 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Just under 50 years. And so we brought her into Nashville, and it was, we did a General Jackson cruise. They dropped us off downtown, the riverboat cruise, dropped us off downtown, and I was walking up the steps with her, and I had her in my arm because I was scared she might fall. And she paused, getting ready to go up the stairs, and she looked at me, and she was really emotional, and she looked at me and she said, "I've only dreamed of cities like this before." And so one of the things that we get to do to promote that culture is to create experiences for people that remind them of the things that are important to the company. And so I've got a lot of other stories like that, but that's probably the story when I think about that lady and what she has accomplished in taking care of her family and patients and her service to that community, and then to be able to honor that individual and give them an experience that can never be taken away, that ensures that they know what's important. And the only thing, Chris, that I ask them to do is when they go back into their hospital they've got to get up in front of the directors and tell the story of what they did when they were in Nashville. So it's one of these kind of replicating stories. There's no way our chairman can keep the culture going. There's no way that I can keep the culture going. But when you start replicating that story over and over again and telling it consistently, then you have a chance, I think, of managing in a very difficult environment. And that's, once again, exciting and fun.
So culture, it's interesting. So one of the things we do, we try to get creative. So we're a startup and we don't have a ton of cash, but we're growing, and so we're starting to be able to do things. So one of the things that we've done is last month we gave every employee $75. And their task was not to go buy something for themselves, but to go do something for their family or their friends. And so the stories that we've gotten, one of our individuals, Russ, who leads our vendor-proof product, which David, funny story, David actually, I came to David and was like, hey, and he's like, I love your product. He's like, can you turn the HR system or the HR department or the compliance department into a revenue source? And we kind of laughed about it, but then like 8 months later, like we actually have a brand new product because of that. And that's just the collaboration in healthcare, right? And in Nashville, we would laugh because literally we would go talk to one hospital system, go talk to a long-term care system, and it's like 5-minute drive. But back to the story, $75, and Russ got engaged in Copenhagen with his wife. And the cook at Catbird Seat is from Copenhagen, and he's getting ready to leave to go back there. And so they had always wanted to go, and so he took the $75 and they went out on their anniversary. And it's just being able to do little cool things that then their families, or their friends are talking about provider trust. Yeah. And that's what gets me excited. Yeah. We don't get to deal with patients per se, but we get to serve the people who are dealing with patients. But then I also get to make my team members' lives, happy.
But don't ever underestimate, you are taking care of patients indirectly. And so what you're doing is you're giving and providing a tool to us to create efficiencies in our marketplace so that we can, what I tell our team all the time, I'm going to look at every single thing that we can do that we can standardize or bring better tools to the business when our size and scale really matters, so that I can save money and then reinvest in areas where our size and scale don't matter one bit. And where our size and scale doesn't matter is around touching a patient in a bedside. No matter how big we get, there's nothing that I can do touching a patient bedside in Gallatin, Tennessee, or in Livingston, Tennessee, or in 68 other locations around the country. But what I can do is use our size and scale in certain areas to create that efficiency. And that's what you're doing. Yeah. So that encouragement of keep doing it, and you're taking care of patients in a way that you and your team probably don't even appreciate, but don't lose that.
I'm struck by talking to you guys or in hearing from you that I think there's a perception that the healthcare industry and hospitals and insurance companies are just out to grow the bottom line, right? And they're just out for the money. But then as I hear you guys talk, you're surprisingly people focused. So this is a business conversation, but you guys are very people focused, which I almost feel like you guys would say there's a misconception of the industry and the people who are serving in this industry. There's a huge people focus, despite sort of this idea that everybody's in it just to grow their own bottom lines.
Well, I'm a capitalist, and I'm unapologetic about that. And I think our organization in most of Nashville, not all of Nashville, most of Nashville has shown that you can provide returns back to your shareholders and run a very efficient business and still take care of patients. We have the opportunity at LifePoint to bring new organizations into the company all the time there is not a correlation that says if I just throw more bodies at it, that means quality of care is going up. Through standardization, through best practices, and through very specific lanes of care, here's what you do. We've proven over and over again that we can get very efficient and we can provide high quality care, and I would put our scores up against anybody. So there is I have reconciled for a long time in my mind that both can happen. And when I'm sitting across from academic medical centers, when I'm sitting across from religious-based organizations, their term is always no margin, no mission. So they're not doing that many things that are different than me, but what we can bring is discipline, a track record, and rigor, and accountability on driving quality scores. So I do spend a lot of time talking about culture. I do spend a lot of time talking about people, but we're very focused on delivering results. And we build a plan, we hold ourselves to a very aggressive plan, we execute against that plan. And I know it can happen because I've seen it happen over and over again in Nashville, and I've seen it happen within our organization as well.
Yeah, we have a value, do more with less. And I think that's where we're at in healthcare. It's like, how do we do more? But we have to drive cost out of healthcare, right? And so those are the challenges that large hospital systems have. And but at the end of the day, it's about people, right? It's people serving people. And if we as leaders don't get that right, like, we're not going to ultimately be able to serve the people that really drive us to get up in the morning. And so ultimately it comes down to people. Like, I run a technology business. We have robots that go out and do all this really cool, crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, it's who's running those robots and who's making sure that things go correctly. And then they turn off their computer at 5 o'clock and they go home and to a family. And we have to realize that as well.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot. I mean, we're in Nashville. We've talked a lot about Nashville and the city that we're in. And Nashville is a hub of healthcare in our country. So what would you say makes Nashville great? And then, I mean, where can Nashville do better too?
Chris, I love the story that you just shared about music and collaboration. Nashville has, I've never really thought of it that way, so it's pretty interesting. Yeah. But all the way back into the 60s, and I give a lot of credit to some individuals that in the 60s decided that healthcare can be different. And keep in mind that in my business, Chris has a different business model than me, but in the business that I'm in, almost 85, just under 85% of the hospitals are still not-for-profit hospitals around the country. So it feels like there's a proliferation of for-profit or investor-owned hospitals, as we call them. Really the only difference between us and the not-for-profit hospitals are we pay taxes and they don't. So we call them not for-profit, not-for-profit. We call them tax-paying and non-tax-paying. But there's still the vast majority, over 4,000 of the U.S. hospitals are still not-for-profit hospitals. Only a small sliver are for-profit. Most of them are not-for-profit. Fortunately or unfortunately, most of them are here. And almost all of them, 80% of the investor-owned hospitals are owned by a management company that is within a 20-mile radius of where we're sitting right now. And so this is the hub, and it started with Hospital Corporation of America. I think the reason it's successful is because Dr. Frist, who I never met, who was a physician, who, if he was sitting here today, he would talk about many of the same things that Chris and I are talking about, and that is taking care of patients, taking care of our people, taking care of our patients, and if we do those things well, the rest will take care of itself. And he started that, and that exploded into now what we know as Hospital Corporation of America, and it looks so simple now, but it had to have been so hard back in the 60s and 70s. And through the growth of that company and leaders that grew up through that company that went off and started other companies, we now have the hub of healthcare. And while not all companies are identical, that DNA that's built into Nashville that started, it's amazing what one person can start, no matter what industry you're in. Chris can probably talk in the technology world what one person can do, but what one person can kind of start and then move out and say, take it to a place that I can't take it to. That's, I think, what makes Nashville great. I think the collaboration of the music industry is an interesting angle as well, but that spirit of the Friss family early on that talked about people and patients first. And I think that continues today. And, you know, things come and go, and there's some companies that don't get that, and, you know, and some of them are successful over the short term, but maybe not over the long term. They have a proven model that's worked, and the companies that have replicated a similar model have proven something very consistent over time. So I think that's it. We can make it better, though, by making it more simple. And we started this conversation with it's complex. And I look at Chris because I can't figure this out, but you got to find a way to make this more simple. You got to find a way to take cost out and make it simple for patients and their families, and make it so easy for when my dad gets his hospital bill 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it looks different than the hospital bill that he got today. The way we take care of patients, the way we bill for patients, the way we educate patients, we've got to find a way to make it simple. If we're going to be successful in the future, I think we'll do two things. One, we won't lose what makes us good, and that's what we talked about earlier, but two, we'll make it simple. And the regulations won't allow us just to all of a sudden make it simple, but little by little we keep chipping away at it and set that as this is what we need to do. And people like Chris and others, whether it's here in Nashville or around the country, you guys will figure it out, and we'll adopt it, and you'll have a big impact on the delivery of care.
We always talk about like what's great for an entrepreneur, and I love the environment we're in. There's so much disruption going on. I mean, provider trust will build, and ultimately, you know, is our goal to sell and get a great return for our investors and myself. And then we're going to turn around and do it again, right? And put we were talking about today, we'll put the band back together. But I think, you know, when you look at really great ideas, you move from simple to complex to simple, right? And you have this kind of this bell curve. And hopefully we're in the middle of this complexity bell curve. Ultimately we can get to the simple, because it's like how do we make things simple? Like an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's great about an iPhone? It just works, right? You don't have to worry about it not working. Although, funny story, I dropped mine in the toilet last week, or 2 weeks ago when I was in Dallas. And have you ever tried to travel without a cell phone? It's horrible. So back to insurance, right? So I went, this is how complicated insurance is, right? I go to the AT&T store, and I'm like, I've been paying my insurance, whatever it is, $6.99 a month, and I should be able to get a phone. And they're like, hey, we'll send you the phone tomorrow. And I'm like, I'm in Dallas. I just dropped my phone in the toilet. I need a phone now. And so that's just the complexity, is like, I'm a smart guy, and I didn't even understand, like, no, I'm gonna get my phone the next day, until I was in a problem, in a situation, and it didn't work out. So I completely agree with you. Like simplicity, how do we simplify healthcare? And ultimately it's through humans and people working together to do that. So.
We're counting on you.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I think the future looks bright, knowing that guys like you are really paying attention to the human aspect of healthcare industry. And so I think we've all learned a lot tonight, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.